The arcade, the original refuge for gamers, now mostly a distant memory in the past, with some remnants left of how it used to be. For many of us in our 30s and 40s, the arcade is an experience that was our first introductions to video games, and still remains heavily in our consciousness in how we interact and play games. Some people might try to tell you that it's already all been talked about. All the games have already been discovered and discussed at length. However, I don't agree. I think there's still a wealth of games that are yet untalked about in larger video game spaces online. And it's my intent with this series, Retro Game Talk, to bring a little bit more of these games into the light. And so, here are 10 arcade shoot-'em-ups that were never ported for home console. Our first title is Nostradamus from 1993, a vertical shooter from the mysterious developer called Face. Now, there isn't a whole lot known about Face. They made a handful of other games. One called Gururin and Money Puzzle Exchanger are perhaps their more better known titles, but they also developed this very competent vertical shooter. The game features two-player simultaneous play, and the power-up system is unique in that you can choose from one of two different types of these floating objects that go near your ship that can be powered up when you hold down the shot button. And when you release it, depending on how much you have charged, you can release a different type of attack, very much like a bomb weapon that can help prevent bullets from hitting you. The game has a somewhat silly storyline that's hard to follow. Like a lot of shooters, the storyline isn't very important. This one revolving around something regarding Nostradamus' predictions. But the game is quite challenging and a lot of fun. It has a normal respawn after you die, so you don't have to go back to a checkpoint. But I think there are some very creative designs here, and I really like the art style and gameplay. This is one of the games that really made me brainstorm this video because I thought, I've never really heard of this game. Now, our next game, Air Gallet, or Air Garrett as the title screen proclaims, is another vertical shooter, this time from Gazelle, in 1996, and published by Banpresto. Now, Gazelle might be familiar to you as one of the developers that split from Toaplan. So Toaplan is a very well-known shooter developer, and this game sort of follows in that lineage. It goes more in for a military-style shooter, which you'll probably see a lot in this video. As was common in the 80s and 90s, military themes were very big in the arcades and in home consoles, so you would see that sort of dominating during this time. This game is definitely a lot of fun with a lot of polish. You might remember it, I mentioned it in my PSTV video where I was emulating it, and I really feel like this game holds up quite well. It's not as good as some other shooters that you might see by Cave or by Toaplan, but it's very interesting nonetheless. It has a pretty neat system of power-ups where you can choose from a couple different types of weapons, and the game has a very nice art style where I think it's kind of like a miniaturization. Like I always think of a lot of these shooters as having some incredible detail that really looks like they put a ton of effort into making these objects, planes and aircraft and stuff, look like real machines based in reality, even though they're sprite-based. Now the game doesn't have a ton of originality. You'll probably find it very similar to a lot of other shooters, and so I wanted to mention that in this list, these games aren't all super standout, underrated classics, but they are some interesting games nonetheless. Now here's a very unique game. From 1999, it's Change Airblade by Sammy. Now this game brings a really unique concept which makes me wonder why it wasn't tried out more during the time, which is more of like a one-on-one fighting kind of concept, where you duel another ship and you basically are similar types of ships, sort of smaller ships, but you can have a lot of dynamic to the fight with power-ups and even a boss mode where the person at the top of the screen can get a special power-up to sort of summon a boss mode. And if you're playing it one player, it does play like a boss rush, kind of like from a Gratia's game or something like that, where you just sort of fight different bosses one after the next. But the two-player mode is where it really shines. And so, due to the originality of this game, I highly recommend it. You probably won't spend a ton of hours playing it, but still just the novelty of the idea really shines through. And the art style is not bad. It looks a lot like a Raiden kind of game, maybe like Raiden 3 or Raiden Fighters. Still, the power-ups are pretty cool, the graphics are good. This one's definitely worth checking out, in my opinion. Now here's one that's probably more well known than most of the other games. This is Carrier Air Wing by Capcom from 1990, and this is a spiritual sequel to UN Squadron, which is very obvious when you see the look and art style of the game and how it plays. It's a horizontal shooter, which is a nice change of pace, and again it embraces that military theme. This time we've got some references to real organizations like the Blue Angels, as you can see here. This craft, the F-18, does appear to be a Blue Angels aircraft, and then you also see another Blue Angel themed airplane that appears during certain parts of the game after you beat a level. And it retains that same challenging gameplay with very similar power-ups. So this is just a nice continuation if you're a fan of UN Squadron, and it does make you wonder why this game was never ported, as it holds up really well. Here's an interesting one, Explosive Breaker from 1992 by Kaneko. Sort of an odd game with an interesting art style. You have a number of craft that you can select from with different weapon types, and the game has a really odd art style that combines sort of these 90s digitized sprites together with traditional bitmap roster graphic sprites. So you get this odd kind of visual clash at times, which is very 90s. And I think the game is really interesting because of this concept. It's sort of an oddball when you compare it to most of other shooters at this time, which is really quite refreshing, and I definitely got some laughs out of playing this. Just due to the unexpected nature, it really feels like they just threw a bunch of ideas together and kind of saw what came out. And you'll find some odd little Easter eggs like this guy's face that pops up when the ship disappears. See that? But still, even though it's kind of odd, I recommend this game. It's quite a bit of fun. It's really challenging too. It has a lot of bullets that crowd the screen and pretty fast manic gameplay, prior to bullet hell style shooters.
Get down, everybody!
Up next is Fighter and Attacker from 1992 by Namco. And this is a game that is another pretty standard vertical shooter with a military theme. What sets this game apart is the fact of how many aircraft you can select from, which are based on real craft from different nations around the world. And they each have different types of power-ups, and they use a ground attack similar to Xevious, where you have to use a second button to shoot a missile to hit the ground-based enemies. So depending on the ship that you pick, you might have a different technology that can automatically lock on, or ones that do like a carpet bombing. So that means you can base your strategy on the type of plane that you choose, and spend quite a bit of time trying out the different ships to see which one you like better. The art style is very nice and detailed, and it holds up pretty well, although it's not super interesting. A lot of shooters at this time did have great detail, so I think it was hard for games to stand out. But still, this isn't a bad effort from Namco, and is still highly playable to this day. Here's a game from Taito in 1992, Grid Seeker, Project Stormhammer, another military-themed shooter, this one with a story based in the Middle East, another theme which is very common during this time in the 90s. Now, the game is quite a bit different, though, due to the weapons that you have, and that is these grid things that are like little options attached to your ship, which you can reposition around them depending on how you would like. And you're also able to summon a little helicopter buddy that can team up with you to help fight some of the bad guys. The game uses a unique presentation of the bullets, which are pink, and was still kind of a new concept at this time, which we see a lot more nowadays. The game features a checkpoint-style death system where whenever you die you have to go get sent back, which can make it quite challenging to make progress, but it's fairly common for these old-school style shooters. Now, it's not a real big standout game, however, it is really interesting to see something like this from Taito, who was much more well known for their Darius series. Okay, here's another one that I played a while back and really made me think of making this video, and that's Psy Battler from 1993 from Jaleco. And this is a vertical style shooter, however, it is quite unconventional. For one thing, you play as a mech, and you can move the ship in 8 directions, shooting in each direction, which is unique for vertical shooters. And you also have a melee attack. So, the weapon loadout of your mech depends on the level too, so the power-up system is quite a bit different from other games. And it also features a checkpoint-style death system, meaning that you might get stuck at some bosses like I did, and have to spend quite a while planning out their attack patterns and figuring out how to learn how to avoid them. The game has a really cool anime art style, which I think holds up pretty well. Not everyone agrees that this is a great game. It didn't get a sequel or anything, obviously it wasn't ported, but it's still a lot of fun, and I played this one quite a bit. Definitely worth checking out. Next up is Armed Police Unit Gallet, aka Cosmic Cop, from Irem in 1991, with a very cool art style that might remind you of R-Type 2. And a fun bit of trivia, this game exists in the same universe as R-Type, taking place during the time of R-Type Delta. And this ship can actually be selected in Final R-Type on the PS2 if you've unlocked it. So the game has some pretty big sprites, some big looking ships for a side-scrolling horizontal shooter, and the gameplay is pretty tough, so it's another one of those old school style ones with a death style checkpoint system where you have to go back if you die, and you can find it easy to get stuck due to the high level of difficulty and the large hitbox on your ship. But it's still quite a bit of fun and an interesting curiosity if you want to check it out. One additional point I should mention is that this game features a bit of a racing element where you're given a time limit that is sort of based on how fast you can make it to the end of the level, and depending on your position on the screen, the farther right you are, the faster you go, or the farther left, the slower you go. So this game concept wasn't really used much. Kingdom Grand Prix is another title that used this concept, though it wasn't something that was made the focus of the game. And our last game today is Second Earth Gratia from Jaleco in 1996. And some parts of this game are impressive looking, although others are not so impressive. So I do like some of the art style, the character designs when they're talking before the levels. The main part of the game is kind of like pre-rendered graphics that have been digitized into 2D art. So, you know, nowadays this is a very dated kind of look, and another one of those games that's like super 90s visual style. So there's some nice detail here, however it does look kind of odd. Still, I think it's not a bad game from Jaleco. It does have quite a bit of fun elements to it, and it does also have ground-based attacks similar to Xevious, like some of those other games we mentioned today. So you have a different button where you can go ahead and hit ground-based enemies, as you see here, in addition to your normal bomb attack. This game does feature quite a bit of fast-moving bullets all over the screen, and so you get some of that manic gameplay style, which is quite challenging. So if you like these kind of horizontal shooters, I do recommend you check this one out. And with that, it's going to wrap it up for today, guys. Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of Retro Game Talk. Let me know what your thoughts are on these games if you've played any of them, or if you want to recommend some games that are lesser known arcade games that were never ported home. Let me know in the comments. Alright, thanks so much. I hope you have a good one, and I'll see you next time.